This is Jacoby from Jalen and Jacoby. Jalen and I were in Bristol, Connecticut to appear on First Take, the greatest hosted show in the history of television. We enjoyed doing that. Hope you enjoyed us on that. But we will always leave you with a dope pod to step to. This dope pod is a little different, though. This is a podcast I'm on called The Nickel Package. Every Tuesday, I'm on the Tuesday edition with a gentleman from Ireland named Cian Fahey, one of the smartest football minds in the business. There are also other hosts that take the other days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. It uploads every day. Make sure you subscribe to that podcast. If you don't want to hear me and a very intelligent and humorous Irish fella talk about football, we'll be back with the regular Jalen Jacoby episode tomorrow. If you want to hear one of the greatest podcasts that's ever been produced by mankind, stick around. The Nickel Package is next. Welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Nickel Package podcast. I'm David Jacoby with Cian Fahey. Hello, Cian.
Hello.
Monday Night Football wasn't that good.
Down.
Let's be honest.
I'm very down.
Oh, what happened? What happened?
I watched Monday Night Football.
So what time is it for you?
The time isn't really a problem. It's like 1 a.m. till 5 a.m. But it's like when it's Tom Savage and Joe Flacco, it feels like 1 a.m. till next Thursday. And I woke up this morning and then I watched Blaine Gabbert and Blake Bortles. So I am living the dream job right now.
Oh,
but also,
God.
I don't want to talk about Monday Night Football. I have something else I want to talk about, and I'm not letting you get away with it. Because I saw this yesterday, and I did not know what to make of it. Actually, I think you might have deleted it.
I've got the bone to pick with you thing going on, and I can feel the smirk from 6,000 miles away. So I will sit back and just let this wash over me. Somebody tells me it's not going to be a compliment.
It's only 2 words, and you'll have to explain it.
Okay.
Floribama Shore. Let's hear it. What is it?
Oh, yeah, Floribama Shore.
It sounds awful.
Well, first of all, Jersey Shore, I'm not sure if you're familiar, is one of the greatest artistic endeavors of our species. And for like 2 years, it was the most important piece of pop culture to the point where like everybody in the world was speaking like them and using their language and looking like them. And it was just like such a phenomenon that it was everybody. I don't even know why I'm explaining it because everybody listening to this is very familiar with it. So they tried to reinvent it with a new crop of people. And I'm older now and I've got children and I've got a job and I've got gray hair and like a belly, and I'm not supposed to be into these things, but it's they keep pulling me back in. I try to get out, and I watched all 2 hours of the premiere last night after Monday Night Football ended. My wife is asleep. I should be asleep. I'm never up until midnight, and yet there I am just watching Nilsa and Jeremiah and Gus and Courtney, drunk Courtney. Whew, Courtney does not like peeing in toilets, man. Courtney will just pee everywhere she can except for a toilet. That's what I watched.
Like every one of those shows has a drunk Courtney, and it's always
you need that. I think this Courtney's with a K and an I at the end, which is very Floribama.
Also, I'm very proud of you. You didn't even go with the "my wife made me watch it" rare. She was
asleep.
She was
she fell asleep halfway through it. Like, what is this trash? I would rather be unconscious than be subjected to this. And I was like, cool, just go to sleep so I can enjoy this in peace without the judgment eyes on me. It
was probably more athletic than Tom Savage and Joe Flacco.
It probably was, but I think that like a good 30% of the NFL does come from this region of the country, and I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding at all.
They can have a sponsorship deal with Roger Goodell. Could make a cameo. That'd be great.
They should. Well, I think Papa John's is out, so Floribama Shore can be in. There you go. Monday Night Football.
I guess we do have to talk about Monday Night Football.
I mean, what is there to talk? I like watching Terrell Suggs do things because he's on Ballers a lot, you know. So I kind of, there's like half of me that's like, Terrell Suggs was he ever not getting sacks for the Ravens like in my lifetime? Like since the Ravens have been the Ravens, I think he's been on the Ravens. Am I wrong? I don't have it in front of me.
Wasn't he on Ballers on like a scooter as well, which is like because he had a blown Achilles?
He's got a little half scooter thing. He got injured on set. He's a reoccurring character on Ballers.
He was like 32 or something at that age, and normally you blow an Achilles at that point as a pass rusher and your career should be over. But he's actually he's had a pretty good season. The kind of thing that I take away from that game though, and it's less about that game. Like, to be honest, even talking about that game just
I know what you're going to
say.
You're going to say the punter is the best quarterback on the field.
That was an amazing play, though, wasn't it? Because you never see.
That wasn't
you
even
never
terrible
see those plays
coverage.
work out that way.
Yeah. It was like he kind of had to put it where he put it, to make it all work. It's a nice catch. I was on board with that play. That's the most exciting thing that happened.
You're a Los Angeles guy, so like Johnny Hecker or Sam Cook.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Johnny Hecker's the Rams punter who throws the ball all the time.
Oh, come on, man. You think I know the punter and the Rams? You don't understand how this die easy fandom works. I just care about stars, and I can only name like 4 guys in the team that I fall in love with every year. That's how this works,
I just care about stars. If that's why you're watching Alabama, sure.
It's not passion. Yeah, there's some stars there. I think there might be some breakouts.
Let's actually get back to my takeaway here and not talk about Jersey
you don't want me to interrupt you again with some nonsense? Okay.
Although we do have a Geordie Shore over here, which is just the same thing with English accents and a really heavy English accent.
If you think I'm not familiar with Geordie Shore, then you must be you must have a bad read on my media habits.
Married life is fun, huh?
If you think I'm at home reading the New Yorker all weekend, what's my wife's doing? Yeah.
Okay, so 6 minutes later, let's get back to Monday Night Football.
I'll interrupt you again.
The Ravens, the thing I took away from this game didn't really have anything to do with this game, because now the Ravens have wins this year. They have 6 wins this year, so they're 6-5. The quarterbacks they've beaten: Tom Savage, Brett Hundley, Matt Moore, EJ Manuel, Deshaun Kaiser, and Andy Dalton. Like, that's a murderer's row of mediocrity, or what I tend to call the merry-go-round of mediocrity for NFL quarterbacks when they swap places, like Ryan Fitzpatrick and Josh McCown. And this is kind of why the AFC is such a disaster, because they are a playoff team, and the Jaguars, who just had Blake Bortles lose them a game, is another probable playoff team. The Tennessee Titans are going to be a playoff team probably, and they can't throw the ball with Marcus Mariota right now. And everything's a mess. There's more crying and things falling over and not working on this than there is on any Geordie Shore program.
Well done. Way to tie it back in.
I'm getting good at this.
The game sealing sort of interception from Tom Savage was particularly savage. I don't think CJ was particularly open, but the ball was certainly not particularly close to him, no matter whether he was open or not. And the press conference, you sort of expect reporters to ask him about that play, and he really had to face the media. I just want to give a listen to that quickly.
No one's here.
You good?
Good. No questions?
Good. Great. He walks into the room. Like, I've been in these rooms before. There's usually like 4 rows of folding chairs, and there's some snacks, and you wait around for the star to come out, and Tom Savage walks out. You can hear the PR representative be like, "There's no one here to ask you questions." He's just like, "We're good?" She's like, "We're good." He's like, "All right," and then he walks off. I think that's worse than having to like face rows and rows of media asking you detailed questions about how bad you are at your job.
It's like when you're getting the silent treatment at home. The media's ghosting.
Exactly. It's really bad.
It happened to Eli Manning. It happened to Eli Manning last year, and Tom Savage at least was like, "Yeah, I'm gone. There's no one here." Eli Manning just stood there and kind of held his arms out and waited around and didn't do anything, and it was just stupid.
Surprised he didn't have a prepared statement that he read from.
That interception though, that's kind of it's a situational awareness is something you hear a little bit about in the NFL with quarterbacks. It's pretty simple. It's, look, if it's 3rd and 4, you have to understand checking the ball down for 2 yards isn't a good thing. You have to try and get 5 yards. So in situational awareness in that situation, the defense knew that the offense needed a touchdown. So when the linebacker is playing underneath coverage and the tight end runs past him, oftentimes he will have to worry about the running back checking down underneath or underneath crossing routes. But when the offense has to go after a touchdown, the linebacker knows that he's not going to get beaten by underneath routes. And if they check the ball down, it's a win for you. So he travels with the tight end up the field, and Tom Savage doesn't adjust his read. He doesn't adjust to situation, doesn't show off situational awareness. So he throws the ball thinking he's got an open tight end, when the reality is he throws the ball straight to the defender. And it looks like it's just a really bad accuracy throw, but it's actually something that's more tied into a bad decision than a bad accuracy.
Can we go to my
football analysis? I forgot about that.
I enjoy it. Can we go to my my new favorite team, the Los Angeles Rams?
Yes, sir.
They beat the Saints this weekend, and I walked away from that. My biggest takeaway from the game was Alvin Kamara is all of a sudden the greatest runner. Like Adam Thielen is the best wide receiver in the league according to you. I think according to me, Kamara is the best running back in the league.
He's having such a weird season because he wasn't really having a huge impact early in the year. He was being productive, but he wasn't making the plays even making sense. That touchdown run he had against the Rams was beautifully blocked and beautifully executed, and he obviously did really well to run away from the defence, and he made the right decisions, made quick cuts, and got out into the open field. But it's less about the running with him. Like he's a very good runner, but when he's on these screenplays, when he's throwing the ball in space, he is phenomenal at just making guys miss, and he's doing basically what Kareem Hunt did for the Chiefs earlier this season, where he's making plays that aren't executed well around him still be productive. Like he's turning gains that should be 2 and 3 yards into 6 and 7. He's turning gains that should be 5 and 6 into 20 and 25. He's very hard to cover when he's in space in terms of if he's running a route or if he has the ball. And he's so strong that even when you get onto his legs or even when you wrap his legs, he still might kick out and keep going. And you saw that over and over again with the Rams, because the Rams are generally bad tacklers. They're generally bad run defense as well. But teams, they can kind of get teams out of their game plans, out of their blueprint, and make them throw the ball and kind of play off script a little bit, and that helps the run defense. But if you commit to running the ball against the Rams, you will generally have a lot of success. So Kamara right now is filling a perfect complementary role to Mark Ingram, and maybe there's an argument that Kamara should be more involved, because I think he finished that game with 11 touches. But I think he finished that game with 11 touches in total. The final one was on that final drive when he ran in a touchdown from a check down, basically. So I think Sean Payton needs to take a little bit of criticism here. He needs to get Kamara more involved. He needs to not kick a field goal in the fourth quarter when he needs 2 scores. So he comes back and has to, even when they get to stop, he has to score 2 scores again. So the Saints are still a very good team. They're still set up. They've still got a lot of talent, but there's a little bit of things to figure out, a little bit of kinks to work through.
Well, I mean, they were on, an 8-game winning streak, so I can understand why there hasn't been too much criticism coming his direction yet, especially with the use of, the running back balance. But I think after this game, you are right that I would be surprised if I don't see more Kamara moving forward. It was a weird game, too, though, because Drew Brees kept trying to throw it away. He threw about, I think, 4 or 5 interceptable passes, and only 1 was caught, I think. And it's for the Saints, it's such a weird place for us to be in with the Saints. They've got a great running game and a decent defense. Over the last 5 years, they've had none of that, and it's been all on Brees' shoulders. You mentioned the Chiefs earlier, and we celebrated them for the first 5 games, and then what was it, 2 weeks ago, they lost to the Giants, and they just seem to be completely falling apart. What is happening with that franchise?
We're starting to sound like a professional podcast, as like linking back to things and mentioning one and then moving.
We talked about Geordie Shore and Florida Bama to lead the whole thing for 7 minutes. So please, and also I'm completely unprepared. So don't worry about us even having any danger of sounding like a professional podcast.
Completely unprepared. What's new there? This game. The Chiefs in general are kind of frustrating and confusing a little bit right now. If you just turn on that game and turn on the condensed view or whatever, or pick the specific offensive plays, on the first 2 drives, it's all straight dropbacks. It's all run from under center. The quarterback drops back without a screen pass or without a play action, without any misdirection. And that's not what the Chiefs offense is, and that's not what the Chiefs offense has ever done in terms of their identity. So you got to the end of the 3rd drive in that game, and they did a misdirection on 2nd down. I think it got gained 3 or 4 yards. It wasn't anything spectacular. And then they tried to throw a screen on 3rd down, and there was a miscommunication. Tyreek Hill motioned from the right side to the left. Albert Wilson was wide to the left, and he was looking at the quarterback all along. I'm pretty sure once Tyreek Hill motioned across, Wilson was supposed to understand that he became a blocker and Hill became the screen receiver, and there was that miscommunication there where Wilson and Hill both went for the ball, and that led to an incompletion, and that led to the first 3 drives of the game them not moving the ball at all. So you're kind of confused by what Andy Reid's doing right now, because he has understood previously, early in the year, that he has to rely on these misdirection plays. And obviously, the more tape the defenses have, the better equipped they are to stop these misdirection plays.
Also, all the other teams in the NFL stole those plays from the first 3 games. And so now it's just kind of it's like a cancer that's spread throughout the league, these misdirection plays that Andy Reid worked on all summer. But continue.
It's what the NFL specializes in. But those misdirection plays, defenses are more prepared for them, but that doesn't mean they're not going to work at all. It doesn't mean they're always going to be shut down. They are still very difficult to stop. So what's going to happen now the last couple of weeks, and you saw it in New York, you saw it in Kansas City, Alex Smith has gone from being like an athlete in a specific system to a guy who has to be a more traditional quarterback, a guy who has to drop back in the pocket, manage pressure, make reads downfield, and that's just not what Alex Smith can do. He's never been that guy. There's one specific sack in the game where he drops back, looks at his first read, goes to throw the ball, panic or changes his mind, hesitates, holds onto the ball, then he drops his eyes, turns right, turns left, turns backwards, ends up running out of a clean pocket and getting himself sacked. And then at the end of the game, he's checking the ball down over and over when they're trying to come back. And he gets to the point where he has to make a slightly more aggressive throw and he gets intercepted. And that's just, Alex Smith's not really a quarterback. He's an athlete. He's a guy who he's like, when you talk about Tyrod Taylor, Alex Smith is basically the same kind of thing, except a little bit more reckless when it comes to playing outside of a situation that's comfortable. Like when he is behind it down in distance and has to make a throw, it's just not going to work. They had one touchdown drive in that game at the start of the third quarter where they were using all the misdirection plays. They were using the screens, they were using the play action, they were getting players into space and easier throws for Smith, and it was easy, and it looked like what it has looked like earlier in the year, and it just feels like they've gone away from what's worked for them for the past 5 or 6 years. And a big difference actually that I should mention is the defense now is nowhere near as good as it has been in the past. So it's a lot when they have these games where they struggle on offense. It's a lot harder for them to still win games.
I'm not I play fantasy, but I'm just not good at it. So by this time of the year, I don't care about it anymore. But Kareem Hunt was this sort of like huge deal, and he just seemed to have disappeared in the last 3 weeks. Can you sort of understand that and diagnose why that is?
I think it's as simple as he's been worn down a little bit and the offensive line isn't blocking great. But like that's going to happen. He was being used a huge amount, but he's still playing really well. He's still a really good running back. He's just gone. This is kind of the perception idea. He's gone from being phenomenal, being like a guy who breaks 3 or 4 tackles, like we were talking about Alvin Kamara, breaks 3 and 4 tackles and breaks off a 20-yard run, to a guy who maybe breaks 1 tackle, breaks 2 tackles, and does that just to get back to the line of scrimmage. So. And then you incorporate the whole idea of the lack of misdirection and creating leverage for your offensive linemen, so it's easier to create running lanes. He's still a phenomenal player. You can't point to him and blame him. If you want to point any fingers and blame people, it's the offensive line. It's just not that good. And like they have talent there. Mitchell Schwartz at right tackle is good. Mitch Morse at center is good. Eric Fisher is fine at left tackle. But they don't have great players there. It's not like the Eagles' offensive line where they're going to absolutely dominate matchups every single week.
So you look at the Chiefs team, who I'm going to say now look like they're not going to be in the playoffs. Like, how do you see this shaking out? You see the Chargers winning that division?
I just want to check the standings beforehand because I don't have them in front of me.
What, you want to bring facts into this?
Well, if you're going to ask me about the specific things here, like I do have some sort of a reputation as a football analyst.
That's fair. That's fair.
We can't all just go.
You've earned it. You've earned it. It's a lot of accent. It's a lot of accent. Let's be honest.
It's pretty much all accent.
I like it.
The TV career is going to kick off and everything's going to go.
I'm on board. I'm on board.
No, I like the problem is the Jaguars and the Titans are both a game ahead of them. But after that, the second wild card is kind of there, unless you think the Texans are 4-7, they're out of it. No. So actually, let's just go through it. The Texans are 4-7, they're out of it. The Colts are 3-8, they're out of it. The Browns are obviously out of it. The Bengals are 5-6, they're out of it. The Chargers are 1 game back. The Raiders are 1 game back. The Ravens are on the same. They're 6-5. The Bills are 6-5. So you're kind of competing with the Ravens and the Bills. So if you want to get in the wild card. I think the Chiefs. I haven't looked at their schedule that much. Actually, the Raiders as well. Yeah. So there's 4 other teams, but I think the Raiders are on a downward trajectory.
Well, I think the same thing about the Bills. So I think. So
if you've got those 4 teams, and we already talked about the Ravens, I think the Chiefs would still expect to finish with a better record than them. So I think they'll be in the wild card spot at worst. But the division right now, that's kind of where the key is. I think the Chargers, we said this, remember when the Chargers were 0-4, I said, if you asked me to pick an AFC team outsider or whatever, and I said I wanted to pick the Chargers, but I thought their season was done. Because at 0-4, you're not supposed to be able to come back. But now, like, they're in position right now where they're 1 game back, they've still got to play the Chiefs, and I would pick the Chargers to win that game. So they should theoretically be in control of the AFC West.
What's been the key to the way that the Chargers have turned around?
Well, defensively, you kind of have to. It's weird for a Phillip Rivers team, but you've kind of got to start defensively because Bosa and Ingram are just destroying everything.
I like Bosa.
he's a monster. And I actually, like, that's a guy who I was kind of wrong about coming out, because I liked him as a player. I thought he was a good player. I did not think he'd be a guy who's destroying plays every single week. He was really agile, technically good, obviously, because he was at Ohio State where they get good coaching, and he was touted as being a technically good pass rusher. But I did not see this explosiveness in him. I did not see this ability to overwhelm guys physically, and he's making NFL offensive linemen look like college offensive linemen, and he's doing it every single week. And you've kind of got this perfect complement on the other side in Melvin Ingram, who is explosive and who can get around the edge. He's a smaller pass rusher, and he kind of gets knocked for being a smaller pass rusher, but that helps him get leverage a lot of the times, and he still holds up against bigger guys, so there's no real concern with him in terms of his skill set. And we talked about their linebacker core actually with Jack Wang a couple of weeks ago in an interview, and the linebacker core has been good enough. It's not great, it's just good enough to get by. They kind of say the same about the safeties, but Casey Hayward at cornerback has been phenomenal again this year, and he's having another great season. Even without Jason Verrett, they're getting a lot of good production out of their cornerback positions with that pass rush. So defensively, they've taken a big step forward. Offensively has been a really big change in terms of how the offense is run. His name escapes me right now. I better check it, because if I get it wrong,
everyone stops listening to the podcast if you get a name wrong. We've never gotten a name wrong on Jalen Jacoby.
No,
or a fact. It's never happened. Yeah, everyone just unsubscribes immediately, and they do. Really, trust me, these things are really important.
When you're getting the two new black head coaches confused for each other all the time. So
now it's a race thing. Oh God, we're all getting fired. Oh God.
Anyway,
no.
The change on offense has been that Anthony Lynn was kind of pushing his philosophy on the offense a little bit early in the year. Anthony Lynn was the Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator last year with Tyrod Taylor and LaShawn McCoy. He wanted his quarterback under center. He wanted to run diverse play calls on running the ball. He wanted to have Melvin Gordon kind of be the focal point. And Phillip Rivers couldn't really do that, because Phillip Rivers would need to then push the ball downfield, and that's not really who Phillip Rivers is at this stage of his career. His arm is actually, the second game of the year against the Chiefs, his arm looked like it was completely done. He was missing throws in that game, and it wasn't just that he was missing throws. He was missing them from completely clean pockets to wide open receivers. There was one play in that game where Keenan Allen, I think it was, ran a 12-yard out route from the near hash. So that's like a routine throw for Phillip Rivers. And the ball sailed maybe 3 or 4 yards over Keenan Allen's head. And he did that a couple of times. It wasn't just a once-off. So Rivers has shown a little bit more velocity in his passes. Against the Cowboys on last Thursday on Thanksgiving, he was throwing very accurately. He had 2 passes up the seam. Both of them should have been intercepted, but both of them were decisions. They weren't arm strength issues, they weren't accuracy issues. So that's kind of a good sign, because you don't expect Phillip Rivers to continue doing that. So if his arm is lively enough, and if Keenan Allen continues to play how well he has, and Hunter Henry is still that mismatch player over the middle, Travis Benjamin is still capable of explosive plays, Melvin Gordon is still capable of explosive plays, they have a huge amount of talent, and all those predictions from before the season where everyone thought the Chargers were going to be a really good team, they might start looking a little bit better again after looking at complete trash in the first month of the year.
Like, I honestly thought 3 weeks into the season, I was like, now I understand why Phillip Rivers didn't move to Los Angeles, because this is his final year. He's not going to play next year. He's washed up. Like, I totally get it. This all makes sense now. And I'm like, I could see them winning in the playoffs. I could see them getting, winning the division, and then, winning another game. And all of a sudden, we're all talking about the Chargers. They've pulled it together at the end of the year, and that's the storyline. But another AFC playoff team, which I'm,
Wait. Hold on. Before we go to another AFC playoff team, what happens now if the Chargers are better than the Rams for you?
I'll just flip. That's an easy switch. But they're in different conferences, so I feel like I can root for them both. One thing about Los Angeles is, like, no one cares. Whatever's hot, you just go with. That's how being a Los Angeles sports fan works. Not a true Los Angelino. Like, if you're a native Los Angelino, then you actually love the teams and you have that. But if you're a transplant that moved here, like, whatever's working. Whatever you see more of around the streets, you jump on that.
David Jacoby bringing you the worst of sports fandom for 20 years or whatever.
Oh, yeah. I really just started changing this way about a decade ago. But the other AFC playoff team that I want to talk to, the final team I want to talk about in the rest of this AFC playoff mess, is the Tennessee Titans. Like, they're a playoff team now. What is happening?
They won this game against the Colts, and no one felt good
Jacoby.
about them winning this game.
Oh, Jacoby.
I was confused. He's been so bad, I've completely forgotten about Jacoby Brissett. opposed to calling him an MVP.
I think you just say yourself Jacoby so much for other reasons that you forgot that there was a quarterback named Jacoby. You're used to complaining about Jacoby. I understand.
No, but we talked about it before the season as well. The scheme there, it just doesn't work for that quarterback, and now the quarterback himself is starting to implode a little bit and make mistakes he previously didn't make, and the whole comfort of the whole offense doesn't work. Derrick Henry, like the Colts were winning that game comfortably late in the third quarter, and then they tried to toss the ball to Marlon Mack, I think is the running back's name, and Mack fumbled it, and the Titans got the ball back at the 2-yard line, so they scored a touchdown from there. Mariota hit Delaney Walker in the far corner, I think it was, and that brought the game back into a contest. And then Derrick Henry is, you probably remember, if you're listening to the pod, you probably know Derrick Henry more as an Alabama player than a Tennessee Titans player, because he's barely played to this point. And Derrick Henry for Alabama was this guy who just he got a lot of wide open running lanes, that whole Trent Richardson thing, that
just
idea
run
that,
people over and all these highlights, and you're looking at him like, oh, he's the next great NFL running back.
Yeah, but he stood out because he could run people over. Like, the question marks on him were, how disciplined as a runner is he? How is he going to do when he doesn't have those wide open running lanes? And that hasn't really been the question mark. The problem with Henry has been, he likes to run sideways. He likes to look for the sideline. He wants to try and he thinks he's Chris Johnson, and he's not Chris Johnson. He thinks he can outrun the edge every single time. But in this game he could, because the Colts have very slow linebackers and a very slow defense overall. But before that point, late in the fourth quarter, like, Henry ran the ball down a couple of times in a couple of different plays, and then DeMarco Murray ran the ball in for a touchdown, and that basically ended the game, a game that the Colts should have easily won. And Chuck Pagano's press conference yesterday, when he was singing about Groundhog Day, that's the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. Also the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
For it to really be Groundhog Day, Jacoby Brissett would have to throw an interception at the end of the game, which I'm very disappointed that he didn't do. But continue.
But anyway, the Titans, like, they won the game, but it was one of those games where they won the game and that's the only positive you can point to. So it's still very much, this is the AFC, man. We spent way too much time talking about the AFC, and the Titans are probably going to be a playoff team, and they've got a quarterback who's capable of lighting anyone up, but the team as a whole right now is just a bit of a mess.
Who are we talking to this week?
We're talking to Joel Anderson of ESPN. He wrote an extensive piece on Earl Thomas and Earl Thomas's background and where he came from in Orange, Texas.
Exciting. We'll listen to that right after this.
Computer, execute 12.4p operation.
Optimizing algorithm. Running encryption packet alpha. Night. Oh, I don't feel so good.
What is it, computer?
Is it hot in here? It feels hot in here. I feel a little clammy. I should lie down or something.
A computer with a virus? Surprising. What's not surprising? How much you could save by switching to Geico.
Those oysters Rockefeller were a mistake.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more.
One of the big challenges when you start a new podcast is finding guests and finding quality guests. And starting this podcast, I had 14 names down, and this is podcast number 15, so now we're stuck with Joel Anderson of ESPN. So, Joel, how are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm glad I could be number 15. Thanks for having me on.
I thought it was a perfect introduction, but we'll move on. So I had you on this week because one of the things with the NFL, and it's being emphasized more now than ever because of the NBA, is that we don't really know these guys. We know some of the quarterbacks. We know we don't even recognize. Like, the Undefeated right now is running a series where they get their writers and they put up pictures of players on their favorite team and see if they can name them, and they don't. They pretty much always fail. And it's one of the quietest guys in the league is Earl Thomas, and you wrote a piece about Earl Thomas last week. So I want to ask you how you wound up writing about Earl and how you wound up thinking that this was a piece worth doing.
Yeah, well, so the way that this started is that this was an idea that was almost pitched at me when I was interviewing for the job to work at ESPN. Me and the editor, Dave Wilson, were both Texas guys, and we both knew that Earl Thomas is from an area that had been, devastated by Hurricane Harvey. And we said, well, you know what, we really would like to get at, like, his connection to his hometown, because we heard that he was doing some great work down there. And as we looked into it and we did a little bit more, research on Orange and all that, all this other stuff comes up. Now, it's not a huge surprise. I'm from Texas, and I'm from, that southeast Texas. Not Orange, Texas, but Houston, which is close enough, though. You get an idea. about the lay of the land. And so we were just like, man, there's this, great story about Earl Thomas and saving a town that, you kind of got to wonder, like, what keeps him connected to a place that's like this. And as we talked, I talked to his family, spent a lot of time with his parents, spent a lot of time with other family members and old friends and classmates and teachers. You just get the sense that this was a guy that, it developed a lot of devotion to that place through his grandfather. So that's kind of how it all sort of flowered, right? We just really wanted to get at some of that.
So one of the quotes that stood out for me from the piece, and I thought there were actually quite a few good quotes in it, but one of the quotes came from Richard Sherman, who you mentioned in the piece that Richard Sherman had visited for one of the football camps along with, I think it was Cam Chancellor and other Seahawks players. But the quote he had about Earl Thomas was, he came from a place not a lot of people get out of. And that's kind of something you hear about different players, especially in football, where you hear about, they came from poor conditions, they came from a place where football was their only way out. But we kind of hear that and then we leave it at that. Like, we don't kind of dive a little bit under the surface more. And you were obviously there, and you're obviously familiar with Texas in general, but you kind of got into a greater detail into why Orange had such struggles and why the people there struggle so much.
Well, I'll one thing that I'll say is that, and it's crazy, because Earl Thomas is going to be a 6-time Pro Bowler. He's a Super Bowl champ. He was a consensus All-American. And if you ask anybody from that town that went to that high school, is Earl Thomas the best player to ever come out of here? They're like, well, I don't know. He's probably top 5. And it's like, this is a town, the only other notable NFL player is former Dallas Cowboy Kevin Smith. He played for the Cowboys throughout the 90s.
And to put that in context, Earl Thomas is top 5 in the NFL right now.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And they're like, well, I don't know. You have to think about it. And so what sort of makes it difficult is, it's tremendously poor. Like, it's even, at least amongst the people in the black community in Orange, Texas. It's an area that's sort of stuck in this like petrochemical corridor of the state. So there was at a time really good jobs there. People that, had, great working class jobs and they could retire. They worked at the DuPont factory, they worked at the shipyard. Over time, a lot of those jobs went away, so we're just stuck with this where people were there for these jobs that are no longer as well paying or that are not even there anymore. So it's poor. The school district is been threatened to be taken over by the state a number of times, and so people aren't necessarily getting a great education there. And it's just a really difficult place. With all that, without a lack of opportunity, without a lot of jobs, without great education, there's just a lot of poverty and people that there's not a lot of ways out of that town. And so, talking to one of the assistant principals at that school, he's a guy that played college football somewhere else, and he just said, you know what, man, a lot of these kids here, their grandparents are their parents. Their parents are either they're in prison or they're dead. Or it's just unbelievable. He'd only been there maybe a couple of years, and he just said, what, I deal with so many kids who are being raised by their grandparents because their parents just aren't here anymore. And so it's a tough place. there are a lot of tough places. I've reported from a lot of tough places, but Orange is particularly tough in that way.
And Earl was, if I have this correct, because I think there was like an Earl 2 and Earl 3 and Earl 1, so I wasn't 100% sure. But Earl was raised by his grandfather then?
No, actually, so his father was there. His grandfather was the patriarch of the family, though. He moved to Orange. He set up a church there. He was very active in the community. So he's like this big, overbearing presence, and that probably is what comes through in the story. His dad was there. His dad, in fact, was a pretty good athlete himself back in the day. Like, he was a long jump state champion in Texas, and got a scholarship to a small little college in Austin, not the University of Texas, but it was a small, historically black college. Didn't last long. He got his girlfriend pregnant and had to move back to Orange, and took care of his family from there. But no, his father was there, but his grandfather was a huge presence in his life, and in Earl's life. And, he would take Earl to church with him and make Earl play the saxophone or drums. He was, Earl the third, the Earl that we know, the one that plays for the Seahawks, was just always constantly with his grandfather. So he just had a tremendous, an outsized influence on his life for what you would think a grandfather would be.
I was suddenly picturing the Legion of Boom as a jazz band there or something.
Earl can play the drums. He can play the sax. He can play the organ. I think he said he can kind of mess around on the piano a little bit too. These are all like instruments he taught to play himself. He is not like he had like music lessons or anything. He's apparently a really, really talented musician.
And he can literally line up in any position on the football field as well. So he's one of those people that's just really, really good at everything. But I do want to get back to this church and his relationship with his father and his grandfather, because when you read through the piece, that you kind of expect to be talking about Earl Thomas, but if you have an idea of how Earl Thomas's personality is, you also have that little suspicion moving in where Earl Thomas doesn't want to talk that much. So I kind of assumed you would have branched out around Earl Thomas and what was around him growing up. But the church kind of seemed to be the point that you came back to all the time, the point of emphasis, and not necessarily in a religious sense, but in a community importance sense. When things went wrong, this seemed to be the place where the people went to, and where Earl Thomas's grandfather seemed to be kind of a leader in not just his own family, but in the wider community.
Yeah, well, I mean, just as a point of reference for my reporting, when I was trying to meet the family, when I was like, I need to talk to somebody in the family, like, and make contact there, I went to a church service on a Sunday, and so I went there, and his uncle is the pastor of that church now. His uncle, who's my age and played college football too, and looks just like Earl. His mother was at the church. She did a little presentation, and she's a secretary there, and a lot of his uncles were there. So, I mean, like, that's a place that his family still gravitates toward. It's like, it still occupies a huge role and like his family's connection to that community. But yeah, I mean, if you go to that neighborhood, there's not much over there. It's not like there's stores. There's not, grocery stores. There's not even really a school in that little neighborhood area. It's just that church. Across the street is a housing project, and then there's some other houses around there. But it's just, there's not a lot over there. So people have kind of come to rely on that church, as an institution there. And I'll say this. So Earl was telling me that when he was a kid, his grandfather would take him out on, several nights a week when they didn't go to church, and it was called Christ for Crack or something like Crack for Crack. Something. I don't know. I'm going to get it right.
I think it would be Crack for Christ rather than Christ for Crack.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it wasn't a recruiting, a drug deal, business. But it was like they would pick up crack addicts and like minister to them and like try to get them help. And, when Earl was little, and Earl said, I didn't quite understand what these people were going through, but like his father was his grandfather would really like go out to these people and try to get them help. And that's the sort of like community mindedness that they had. So yeah, man, you go there now, and that family is still really connected to that church, and it's no wonder that when there was a hurricane, when Hurricane Harvey hit, that people turned to that church to get the help that they needed.
You mentioned a hurricane, but Hurricane Harvey it's not like the first time that's happened in Orange. This is a recurring theme in Orange, and they're constantly being hit with kind of natural disasters, I suppose. Yeah, no, absolutely. So you have Rita, which happened in 2005, and Rita was a hurricane that actually devastated Earl's own home. His home got destroyed by Hurricane Rita in 2005, and so that they had to move into a Motel 6 for a while, and then they were living in a FEMA trailer for that time, and that all lasted about a year. So this was like this was when Earl was in high school, and he was doing this, and but for that year, he talks about going over to the Waffle House. They basically had to eat. I mean, that's how they made it through that year. And then they had Hurricane Ike, which I think was in 2008, and then of course Hurricane Harvey. So this is an area that's really vulnerable. It's like right on the Texas-Louisiana border, and it's right near the Gulf Coast, the Gulf of Mexico.
And so, yeah, it's just in a really, really vulnerable position. And so, like a lot of places along the Gulf Coast, they're always just sort of having to decide, hey, look, are we going to be able to stick it out? Is this a place that's going to be able to make it? And you wonder after Harvey, like how people are going, if people are going to come back. I mean, this is a place that was under like 3 feet of water. So many people haven't moved back yet. It's just, and then there's a place that there's not a lot of jobs. The school, it's not like the schooling is great. There's not a lot of things keeping people there. So you kind of wonder how long people will be able to stick it out, especially if there's another storm. It'd be really difficult to see people sticking it out again, but, people are determined like that, right?
But you mentioned he lost his home in 2005, and one of the kind of brighter elements of the article, I suppose, one of the less harsh details was that Earl was able to build a new home for his family back in Orange, and that home has actually withstanded the hurricane last year, and he's actually that's freed up his family to help other people and continue doing what they were doing in the church. But I think that losing your house is obviously a major thing, and maybe it's trivializing it a little bit, but the timing of it kind of stood out to me, where he's losing his house for a year in 2005, so Earl Thomas is 15 at that point. This is around the time when he's starting to look at college, I assume. This is around the time when Texas must be closing in on him at this stage to become this star college athlete.
Yeah, no, they were recruiting him. I think the assistant, and for Texans might know this name, Oscar Giles, was the guy that was in on the recruitment of Earl. And so if you read old stories about them, they talk about we had to meet him up at the motel, or people were really worried about hey, is he going to move, or where's he going to go? This is like a really these are the formative years of his high school career. And he's living out of a Motel 6 for a year. So, yeah, man, it's kind of you don't want to draw too much up from it, because there were a lot of people that had to deal with a lot, right, during that time. But that he was able to sort of put that aside and still excel. I want to say I can't remember if this is his junior or senior year, just off top, but his junior and senior year, they only lost 4 games, total. And almost, I think they made it to the state semis his senior year. So with Earl as the centerpiece of that, Earl was a running back and, defensive back. He did it all, right? So, yeah, man, this is a kid that, he clearly was able to compartmentalize and still excel on the football field. And, it's not a surprise that he is where he is, if you think about where he came from and we had to overcome to get there.
In general, I feel like he's kind of always been this superstar athlete, so I can't imagine what he was like in high school. It must have been absolutely because you've seen the videos of Adrian Peterson and guys like that who are massive. Yeah. But Earl, I presume he didn't stand out for his size because he's not big now. So I imagine he was just phenomenal and all over the football field in general, just taking over.
Yeah, people talk about his speed, right? Back then, he was just incredibly fast and incredibly instinctive, and that's something from watching film. That Earl just seems to be able to diagnose plays, and he knows where the ball is going to be. So you combine his instincts with his speed, and it's amazing. And I'll mention this: he was also the starting point guard for their basketball team when they went to the state semis. Now this isn't a school that's known for having a basketball power. But he averaged 9 points a game, 4 assists, about 5 steals, playing point guard for a team that went to the state semis. That just kind of gives you an indication of the athlete that he was. He could do, I think he played baseball too and was pretty good at it. Ran track, obviously, because everybody that plays football in high school runs track, if you're an athlete like that. And I think once he qualified for state in a few events. Yeah, man, he's overwhelming. But again, I'm telling you, man, down there, it's really hard to impress people. Earl's high school coach, believe it or not, coached Adrian Peterson in high school. He was at Palestine High School for a couple of years before he came back to West Orange Start. And so it's just I'm trying to be hey, can you just tell me how great Earl is? Give me some context. And he's well, I coached a guy you may have heard of called Adrian Peterson. And he's listing off all these other dudes. And so it's although they're very appreciative of Earl and they're very proud of him, they won't give him the props of being like, yo, like he's overwhelming. It was amazing to watch him play. They just don't do that.
Are you sure it wasn't that other Adrian Peterson who was like on the Bears practice squad at the same time as Adrian L. Peterson?
Yeah, that dude was awesome too. Georgia Southern or something like that. Yeah, nah.
Actually, one of the just because you mentioned that, just because like that idea that Earl like isn't like he does a football camp there every single year, and you described it as the city's signature event, and obviously that's huge. But one of the things you also mentioned that kind of stood out to me, and it kind of runs a little bit in that line of he's not idolized where he is. But you mentioned a place called Vidor. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. Vidor, maybe.
Vidor. Yeah, Vidor.
Yeah, and you mentioned that it's obviously a violent place, is how you described it, and kind of a dangerous place in a general sense of it. And Earl, I'm guessing the way just my way I received this interaction was you kind of mentioned the place to him, and the quote response, "I'm not going over there," even as this Texas superstar, even as a Seattle Seahawks superstar, as a Super Bowl winning safety who's recognized as a great all over the country, and he would be fearful of going to a place like this.
Yeah. Let me just for a second. I don't want to bore people with the context of Vidor, but Vidor, when I was a kid growing up in Southeast Texas, Vidor was like a reputed sundown town, and in 1993, they tried to integrate their public housing. Like the federal government was like, hey, we're going to take away your town. We're going to take away your funding if you don't integrate your public housing. It was a town at the time that literally had 0 black residents out of about 10,000 people. And what happened was at the Klan march, they tried to move these people in, and within a few months, they had run those people off. And so they didn't have black people live in Vidor up until later in the decade. And then I think in the most recent census, Vidor, out of, like I said, it was still about 10,000 people. They only had 13 black residents, right? So it's a place that is well known throughout that part of the country that, like, yo, do not stop there for gas. Do not, don't be caught there after dark. Now, the people that live there are adamant about the fact that things have changed. That, oh, man, I promise you, we treat people, respectfully now. We've got plenty of black people that live here. There's someone on our football team, blah, blah, blah. It just, even if that were true, they just have not been able to do anything about their reputation. So to bring Earl into that, Earl is a dude who is, kind of guarded. He's not. He'll open up to you if you get Tom around him, supposedly. But like he's just a guarded dude, and he has people he hangs out with, and that's about it. But apparently, his father goes down into Vidor and goes fishing with some people or something. His father's kind of an outgoing guy, knows everybody. And so he goes over there. So that's how that came up. We were just talking about, like, who is it? Like, tell me a little bit about your dad. Your dad is kind of a crazy guy. He's really outgoing. He's a personality. And so we were talking about his dad. He's like, yeah, man, my dad, you were going to Vidor. And I was like, really? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, so have you ever gone over there? He's like, man, I'm not going over there. And so that's kind of how that happened.
I thought there wasn't a huge amount of Earl's quotes in it, but it's in kind of the description I have of him, or the perception I have of him, the words he did use were kind of were pointed and kind of significant. And it felt like when he was talking, like, that there was a little bit of resentment that had grown towards, maybe not resentment might not be the right word, but a little bit of a reluctance. Like he said, he wouldn't move back to living in Orange. He said, like, going forward, he doesn't really grow as much when he goes back there. And how did you interpret that? How did you receive that?
Man, it was really tough, Ken, because Earl was literally my last in-person interview for the story. So you have, like, you talk to his family, who's obviously happy down there. They're celebrities down there, man. They get taken care of. They go into restaurants, people recognize them. His jersey is on, hanging up in restaurants there. They're fairly well taken care of. And so I'm going up there thinking that I'm going to talk to Earl about, I'm like, got this dedication to my hometown, and, that's why I'm helping it out there in Harvey, and that's why I do this football camp there, and this is why, when our high school football team goes to the state championship game, I'm buying buses for townsfolk to go to the game. And then I get there, and he's just like, Yeah, man, I'm just not as interested in hanging out there as much as I used to be. I don't grow as much when I'm there, and I'm like, oh man, this kind of changes some things, and it's not like we were on the record, so it kind of, it was surprising to me that he was open about that, and I'll, something nobody would be able to know because it's not like I wrote about it, but since that story has been published, his family's been really hurt by that. His family is very. I don't know if they didn't know or if this is something they just not discussed, but they're not happy with the way that the town was depicted in the story. Also, they're hurt by the idea that Earl would say, "I'm not coming back there to live," full time. So obviously, this is something that is recent. His brother was living with him in Seattle up until this past year, and then his brother moved back down to Orange to be a receivers coach at that local high school. And so you're thinking, okay, it's kind of moving along. Like everybody's moving back down towards Orange, and when Earl was done with his football career, he's going to come down there. And Earl was like, nah. Yeah, he's like, it was so random. He was like, yeah, man, I got my daughters. I want to live someplace where there's not racism, where there's diversity, where there's good schooling. And he was like, yeah, I like Seattle. And he's like, and then he said, yeah, I also like Scottsdale, Arizona. Scottsdale's nice. And I was like, okay, that's really random. But anyway, so yeah, man, that's it's something that he's still clearly grappling with, and it'll be interesting to see what happens,
That quote you mentioned when he talked about his daughters and he wanted them to live somewhere where there was no racism, it kind of, I don't know, it turned to me, it kind of like he had this idea of a place where racism didn't exist, and it just seemed a little, I don't know, is innocent the right word? Is ignorant maybe the right word? It felt like a little, he was searching for a euphoria idea that kind of didn't really sound true, maybe.
Well, I'll say this. So when you're writing when I was writing that story, I wanted to be like, well, how can, every city has its problems. There's not a city in the country where people that are marginalized or feel marginalized don't have some problems with it, and they'll say, hey, look, there's some issues with racism or sexism or, whatever. And I spent enough time reporting in Seattle in the past to know that there's a lot of inequity there, right? But there is something different to Orange. You go down there, and it feels like, Tim, do you know In the Heat of the Night? Are you familiar with that show, Carol O'Connor and
No.
Howard Rollins? No, you don't know.
Listeners will be, so that's okay.
Okay, yeah, right. Well, you can go look it up. I'm an old person. So, and I watched it with my nana growing up. But it feels like that, like a southern town that's just kind of stuck in its ways. It's kind of grasping for a new identity. And so it's different. Even if Seattle and Scottsdale have their problems, they're still cities that are sort of thriving, and they've got some diverse populations. Whereas that's just not ever going to happen for Orange, unfortunately.
In the Heat of the Night, 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, so maybe it's a good show.
I'm telling you, it was a movie too. So it was a movie and a show, but the show was. I'm not going to say it was good but it was on when I was a kid, so I had a choice. There wasn't a lot of options. Yeah.
Actually, I do have to. I know we're running long, but I do have to mention one thing beforehand, because there was another quote in there, and it's a little bit more trivial again compared to the actual meat of the story, which was about Orange and the way he grew up and the state of where he lived. But when he actually got to talking about football and talking about the Seahawks and talking about the NFL, he said, I'll get the exact quote, "Even on this team, they don't respect me like they need to." That quote was kind of very significant in the sense that he seems to think the Seahawks don't appreciate him enough. And coming with last year, when he got injured last year, he was very serious about retirement, apparently, and he talked about retirement. And I've kind of wondered all this season, while Earl Thomas has been healthy, everyone around him getting injured, and the Seahawks window kind of looking like it might be closing, that it wouldn't surprise me if after the season he just turned up and said, I'm retiring. Now, I don't want to force you into speculating on something you don't feel comfortable speculating on, but it's something I have to ask you about.
No, so yeah, that surprised me too, but he was sitting in his room. This was the week after he had that hamstring injury against the Texans. So clearly he was frustrated, and he he was going through it. Like he just has not had a lot of injuries in his career, and talking to people around him, like that's just something that he's really had to struggle to deal with, and so that's made him think about, you know, what I call his football mortality. I don't know that he would retire, but he did say, I could go ball somewhere else, no problem. You know, like that's something that he told me. He was like, you know, so if it comes to that, if I have to go somewhere else to play, I'll do it. Like that's just the business. So I do think that he's kind of coming to grips with the idea that he may not be, that either the Seahawks are not going to be what they were, or that he may end up somewhere else. Or, you know, that the Legion of Boom as we know it probably is not going to be, it's probably not going to be there the next year. There'll be some changes. I mean, they're getting old now, right? So I certainly got the feeling that, you know, he's prepared for the next stage of his career, whatever that is.
That's the quote that's going to tell me if the aggregators listen to this podcast or not, because Earl Thomas, I could certainly ball somewhere else from Joel Anderson. That's the one that's going to get. That's the one that's going to have the Seahawks fans angry at you.
Oh man, well, you know what? I mean, people have been mad at me about this story already, so I guess they'll have to get in line, man. You know.
I've been mad at you long before this story, though, so that's okay.
Yeah,
all right,
I'm impressed that we got through pretending that we liked each other long enough for this to happen. So I'm glad I could do you a favor.
I had a 30-minute time limit on being nice to you, and we're coming up on it. So, anyway, you can find the story on ESPN.com. It's in the magazine as well, is it?
It is in the magazine. I haven't seen it yet, but it is in there. Yes.
And it's by Joel Anderson on Twitter, BY Joel Anderson, I believe. So, thanks for coming on, man. This was pretty much everything we were looking for, the detail in the story, and just the general access to an NFL player who isn't a quarterback at this stage. Basically, you and Mina are the only people who have done it in recent times, as far as I can tell. So this was great, man.
No, man, thanks. I was glad I got to do it. Thanks for having me on, man.
Thanks for listening to the show this week. Thanks to Joel Anderson for joining us to talk about Earl Thomas. Jacoby and I will be back next Tuesday, and we'll be recording the podcast together from Los Angeles, so don't miss it out.
Thanks for listening to The Nickel Package. For more from David Jacoby, listen and subscribe to Jalen and Jacoby. Available in the ESPN app and in Apple Podcasts.